What's up everyone, it's ENDYMION, and recently there's been some updates surrounding Warhammer 40K and how Games Workshop is really driving the point home that the lore changes surrounding things like female custodies is here to stay, and they're changing the history alongside fan websites, and they're now gaslighting users too. And there's some weird evidence that Games Workshop is promoting certain ideological stances that are, well, they're hard to talk about on YouTube, let's put it that way, you'll see. Beyond this, Kotaku has decided to throw their hat in the ring when it comes to Stellar Blade, and a new salvation for non-woke content emerges unexpectedly from Saudi Arabia of all places. We'll get there too, but first let's look at the Warhammer discourse. Recently, the official Warhammer 40K YouTube channel has released a new lore update and focus on the Adeptus Custodians, which is suspiciously made during the ongoing controversy when it comes to Warhammer and the fandom rejecting these changes. I don't need to tell you that the backlash towards female custodies existing all of a sudden has not gone over well whatsoever, as the ongoing culture war there is still raging despite everything else that's happened. That being said, during this official lore update video, which is supposed to lure in users to become interested in joining Warhammer as a hobby, the video goes over the history of the custodies, yet never once during the entire video are they referred to as men in any capacity. In fact, the entire video instead refers to the custodians as they or them only. Of course, this is being done to normalize the acceptance of female custodies into the fandom, which is ridiculous, but this is what companies are doing now. If they keep pushing concepts people don't like, they believe eventually users will just get fed up, lay on their backs, and take it instead of pushing back anymore. And that's exactly what's happening here. It's the classic make changes to uproot the troubled old community to make way for a new one, which is not only moronic, but it never works. They tried it with comic books thinking they could pull in millions of new readers by offering more socially political aware stories and characters. But for the past 10 to 15 years, this has done nothing but tank sales and alienate new readers. The Marvel Cinematic Universe, of course, is the peak example of how chasing identity politics can turn your brand into a shadow of itself. Gone are the golden years of Disney's reign when they could release a movie called Ant-Man and somehow make almost as much money as Dune Part 2 in comparison on brand recognition alone. But you can get away with these things like that when the brand is obviously powerful. Nowadays, superhero movies are languishing in the pits of despair for the most part, and the same can be said about many video game franchises as well. The truth is that you gain nothing from belittling and attacking your consumer base regardless of what you're selling. Why replace your barbecue restaurant with vegan-only options when you know it won't sell? That's what these companies are doing. But when you have a nuclear pushback like you did with Warhammer here, it saddens me to see that instead of retconning the retcon, they're doubling down and refusing to change it instead. Games Workshop has also made a new page for the Adeptus Custodies going over lore, how to paint them, what to buy, and all of that. And part of that page where they describe the lore, they say this: potential custodians are taken in at a very young age to better survive the rigors of their transformation. No older than late infancy, for the fundamental changes that will be wrought upon their flesh, minds, and souls are tantamount to apotheosis. It is considered a great honor for those of Terran noble houses to submit a child. Not a male child anymore, just a child. You see how easy it is for these companies to retcon things and push narratives? All it takes is a simple push. A little change here or there until eventually people don't know the truth anymore, and that's what irks me the most. Is that we're seeing things getting deliberately changed in front of our eyes, and when we question it, we're being called crazy. It's not even female custodies. Remember when Netflix attempted to say that Cleopatra was always black? And when you threw actual history in their faces, the backlash was, oh, you're just a racist, instead of admitting that what you're doing is historically inaccurate from the get-go. Remember the Woman King, which attempted to make the Kingdom of Dahomey seem to be this righteous nation of warriors? When in reality their king was literally called the Slave King by his supporters because he sold other black people into the chains that bound them to other countries for goods and profit? Yet instead he's portrayed as this righteous king with an army of warrior women. And yet if you bring up that movie's actual historical context, you just get called a racist, even though factually what they're showing you is not true. Of course, comparing real-world changes to fictional figurines is a stretch for some, but I think it applies just the same. And the point here is that history, lore, the very concept of what is fact versus what isn't, is important whether it's non-fiction or fiction itself. Ideas and concepts need to be respected, and the fact these things keep getting changed to fit an agenda that leans only in one direction proves that it's being done deliberately. There was even some damage control articles from Wargamer recently, like this one titled, Games Workshop confirms there are female Warhammer 40K Adeptus Custodes. Female Space Marines are a touchy subject for Warhammer fans. But a new codex reveals their Adeptus Custodi allies always included women. And this fan website, which I covered in a previous video for being ran by woke activist morons, yet again attempts to gaslight the fan base into accepting that these changes have always been there when they haven't. There was one part in that article, by the way, that really just made my blood boil. Here's what it said. It isn't technically a lore retcon. With regular Space Marines, older Games Workshop lore texts explicitly restrict the conversion into super soldiers to biologically male human children, meaning it'd likely have to make up new story elements if it ever wanted to justify introducing female Space Marines. But the arcane processes used to craft their ever-gianter custodian cousins, the superlative warriors of the Emperor of Mankind's personal guard, first created long before the Horus Heresy, have always been left deliberately mysterious, with no such sex or gender-related rules applied. But you're lying. You know you're lying. You know you're not telling the truth here. Come on. Up until a week ago or so, the accepted lore since forever ago was that there was no female Custodes, the same way there's no male Sisters of Silence either. These have to be respected because lore needs to matter when it comes to these things, or else it's all pointless and a waste of time and money. I feel for the people who supported businesses like Workshop in the past. How do you think someone out there who spent hundreds of dollars in time painting and shaping their Custodi army feels knowing that the army they bought to represent them is now being changed into something else entirely? Like, what if you wanted to be these badass righteous Custodes who protected humanity, then all of a sudden Games Workshop retcons it and goes, actually all Custodes were always agents of chaos and they're actually all bad guys, also they're not even human, they're just orcs in disguise. You would look at your army and go, what the hell is even the point of any of this if everything from meaning and lore can be changed on a dime like this? And it's like the Wargamer article claims, these changes will not stop here. But remember that they say it right there plain to see. The superlative warriors of the Emperor of Mankind's personal guard, first created long before the Horus Heresy, have always been left deliberately mysterious with no such sex or gender related rules applied. So it's as we feared, it's only a matter of time before Custodes aren't the only faction where lore isn't respected. But eventually, you'll see female Space Marines too, and I can hear the comments being typed right now saying, what's the big deal? Why is it so bad for a female Custodi or Marine to exist? It would be like me writing a Wonder Woman comic book and suddenly going, actually, there's always been male Amazonians? And actually, most Amazonians are men, and the women are but a small section of Themyscira that defends the male Amazonians from harm. Feminists would go, but Themyscira is the paradise of female Amazonians only. This damages the lore. And yes, it would be. It would definitely damage the lore in more ways than one, but that's what this is the equivalent of. Just as much as women deserve to have their factions or whatnot, whether it's the Sisters of Silence or the Amazonians in DC Comics, so too should men as well. But weirdly enough, it only ever seems to be a problem when the gender purity starts leaning too heavily in the male direction, but never the other way around. It's sort of like how you always hear some news reporter or whatever say, oh, we need to get more women into male-dominated spaces like engineering or maybe construction or something. Yet you never hear those same people say, oh, we need to get more men into nursing or being makeup artists. Because it's strangely only ever a problem when something becomes male-dominated, but female-dominated, well, that's perfectly fine and working as intended, clearly. And this is not okay and proves the bias of so many. It's not about cultivating a community. It's about erasing and disrespecting male-dominated spaces for no other reason than they can. If this wasn't the case, then these things simply wouldn't happen. But it's why you're seeing so many beloved properties that are primarily male-dominated being eviscerated from within by the bloat of hiring activists and trying to appease them. What I hate about it is that they just don't support things even when they're vocal about it. In case you forgot, there was this recent Sweet Baby release, Tales of Kinzara Ziao. It's been out for over a week at this point, and we can now see on Steam anyway that there was not even 10,000 sales of the copy on that platform within its debut week, which unless your game was made by one person in a weekend, anything less than 10,000 is abysmal regardless of platform or genre. There's currently barely over 100 people in-game actually playing Ziao as we speak on Steam, but this is what I'm saying. Game websites were defending the game. People on Twitter who got thousands of likes per post said, oh, we need to defend and support the game. Yet not only 2,000 people at best bought it or had an online peak over 1,000 at any time. The game is also available on PlayStation Plus, but people didn't buy the game to play it there, it was just available with subscription services. So in terms of actual sales, the game clearly failed, but why am I talking about this random sweet baby game in a video about Warhammer? The answer is simple. They don't support the things they claim to care about. If they did, Ziao would have been a runaway success. They could have wrote an article saying Ziao sells 100,000 copies in 24 hours, sticking it to the chuds or something. Yet those articles don't exist, do they? Instead, what we're seeing is that these projects that push whatever ideology or nonsense these activists claim to enjoy always seems to fail. And it's simply because companies are being tricked into believing people want stuff like this, but then nobody buys it and then they fail. Like that Park Place had 2 more articles that confirm this, which were titled, Rumor Netflix trashes 2 The Witcher spin-offs after announcing main series ends following season 5. And the other article is titled, Rumor Planned Photon series starring Teyonah Parris scrapped after the Marvel's box office failure. What we're seeing is companies realizing in real time what Games Workshop will soon realize themselves in the coming months and years as well. That people don't actually want these projects to exist and they will never support them. I'm sure once some activist finds out the Marvel's Photon series got cancelled, they'll say it's because it's racism or sexism. Yet women clearly didn't support movies like the Marvels either, so could the failure of such a project be only because of men? Or is the reality much simpler to explain that people just don't want content that's made about stuff they don't care about? When it comes back to things like Warhammer and others, the fact is that these companies are targeting what they allegedly want their customer base to be instead of what it actually is. If my fan base is mostly men, which based on my analytics they are, but there is women too, I see you, would it not be beneficial for me to maybe not attack my male audience? The answer is yes, by the way, but if I wanted to lose goodwill with the viewer base, I would pull a Warhammer or Marvel, but it never works anyway. Then people started to notice that Games Workshop was promoting other stuff in their magazines. One image was this on screen here, which was sent by a fan of Warhammer, and it reads, Hello, my LGBT pride-themed Space Marines chapter The Gatecrushers is basically a story of happy discovery. It all started with a gift for a friend, a Tyranid that I painted using the trans pride flag colors. At first I thought it wouldn't end up looking all that great with the colors being so unconventional, but the meaning behind it mattered to my friend, so I went for it anyway. I was so wrong. The color scheme turned out pretty incredible and made me realize that I shouldn't dismiss unconventional ideas straight away and to try things out. Seeing as I'm a huge Space Marines fan, I tried out the same scheme on a reverse second row above and it came out just as well as a Tyranid. So I thought if it worked out well with one pride flag, why not try some of the others? After all, it would be challenging, fun, and a meaningful nod to communities dear to me. And then White Dwarf magazine congratulates them. However, people were quick to realize that one of the paint jobs had a very, well, let's just say it's going to be hard to talk about on YouTube. It's this one right here. It's pink, blue, yellow, and white. So in case you don't know, and I didn't even know this because let's be real, there's so many new flags getting made every single day to the point it's impossible to keep up with all of this. But apparently this color scheme is the same colors on the MAP flag. And in case you don't know what MAP means, it stands for Minor Attracted Person. Yeah, adults who like children. It's really hard to speak about this on YouTube. But anyway, as you can see, Warhammer celebrating and pushing this piece in their article specifically is, well, it's creepy to say the least. Some people online said that the color schemes also relate to another sexuality called pangender, but the colors, I mean, they're still very much the same scheme as the MAP flag too. And this is kind of what I've been saying, is that unfortunately, when you normalize certain things, degeneracy in various forms will find their way into the fandom as well. They always do. And I don't know about you, but celebrating something like this in your official White Dwarf magazine is definitely not a good look, all things considered. Maybe the writers and editors didn't double check what every color scheme meant. I mean, that could be a possibility. But I feel like allowing this to get through is definitely a massive oversight on Games Workshop and White Dwarf magazine's part. And if this is the sort of fan base you want to cultivate and cater to who push identities like that are very obviously problematic, it kind of shows where the hobby is going. There's nothing wrong with expressing yourself, but I feel like there should be a collective understanding that people who champion that particular viewpoint, I don't really care what side of any political aisle you're on, that's messed up, dude. But this is what they're doing. They're pushing out the actual paying customers and are clearly working as the smoke begins to clear from the initial female custodies controversy into normalizing it even further. Doesn't help that in Games Workshop's own website update about Adeptus Custodes, they push the codex that has been confirmed to contain the lore changes surrounding the faction already. So none of this is going away, and they will continue to double down. And I guarantee you, sooner rather than later, you're going to see female Space Marines, mark my words. Of course, you'll never see a male Sisters of Silence ever because that would be obviously problematic in the eyes of these same weirdos. But anything male only must be purged, stripped, and destroyed in order to make way for progress. But unfortunately, the Californication of entertainment doesn't end there. One user on Twitter tipped me when it came to this story where they showed how developers who've worked with Sony have been asked to only consult with the English side of Sony when it comes to censorship concerns. The user in question is named Permaband, and they posted some screenshots where in news articles, Japanese developers explain how they are being forced to adhere to Western ideological standards when it comes to their media. One of these is from Gamatsu.com and is titled From Way Back in 2018, Visual Novel Silverio Trinity Coming to PlayStation Hindered by Recent Sony Regulations. And as you can see on the right here, the devs explain frustration that their game, which is for 18 years and up audiences only, or M for mature, was forced to submit their claims and evidence in English only. And only the English teams would be covering whether the things being placed in the game were problematic or not. And when the devs asked if the people in charge of censorship at Sony were able to speak Japanese, they were ignored and just forced to put it in English. Which is a long-winded way of saying that some of the groups involved at Sony when it comes to censorship are obviously not even capable of speaking Japanese. Which makes no sense when a lot of the content that comes out for Sony is obviously from Japan. And another group of devs during a live stream said while working with Sony that all communications and submissions between game companies and Sony are now filtered through their California branch in English, not just the censorship. Any complaints about the censorship now have to go through the team performing the censorship. Sony has ended the policy of allowing publishers to use the local rating system, but instead must use the full Western standard. In other words, instead of allowing Japanese published games in Japan to use the CERO rating system, all games on PlayStation must adhere to ESRB, no matter where they're published. NISA's constant struggles with the ESRB, which was given them stricter rules to the anime art style of their games, comes to mind. So games coming from Japan or Korea and then some, like Stellar Blade for example, are not being placed up against the CERO, which is basically the games rating system within Eastern markets, but instead that of the ESRB, which is obviously created and upheld by Western standards only. So what we're seeing is a very vocal minority group in California which deals with censorship in Sony's games are not only demanding all info be sent in English, because obviously they don't speak Japanese, but everything also must fit the Western standard, which is beyond moronic to me. Look, I love most of Sony's games, but I am also critical of them, and I think placing all of their censorship claims within the hands of very evident activists is a moronic move in every regard. Of course, things are going to be unfairly censored when the people in charge of said censorship lean in a very specific political way and think only one way is right too. Other places like Saudi Arabia are apparently doing the opposite of what Sony's California branch is doing. From Bounding into Comics, we have this article titled, SNK's Royal Saudi Arabian owner aims to have the King of Fighters developer retain its Japanese identity. I want it to once again be as bright and soaring around the world as it was in the 1990s. In case you didn't know, which I didn't even know to be real with you, the King of Fighters company owner is a Saudi Arabian prince named Mohammed bin Salman. And he's a guy who obviously has billions thanks to all the oil money and all of that. According to Yasuyuki Oda, who is the King of Fighters series producer, he said, "For us, we're just focusing on making games. We're not a political company or anything like that, so it doesn't affect us in any way." So this may sound weird, but it seems like the best thing for King of Fighters is being in the hands of this Saudi Arabian prince guy. Because he's obviously completely against wokeness and will not allow for any of that Western rot to make its way into the game. Also, Bin Salman owns 100% of the shares of SNK too, so he literally just owns the entire thing and the answer only to him. But it's great to see that a guy who is very clearly not Japanese himself wants the Japanese-centric series to retain its identity, and that's great. And I feel like if more people in power had the mindset of this Mohammed bin Salman, maybe content wouldn't be so terrible as it is now, especially in the West. And I think that's what's best for everything, is for content to retain its national pride and refuse to bend the knee to the insane whims of crazy activist people all over. Of course, I'm sure once a new King of Fighters comes out, if it doesn't check certain boxes, game journalists will definitely complain. But the truth is that what Salman is doing here with the IP and the company at large could theoretically lead to big profits in the future, especially in this day and age, where people are constantly looking for anti-identity politically driven content. And I think what has happened with Stellar Blade and the discourse surrounding that, or how Warhammer continues to push the nail ever deeper, is that audiences don't want these companies to silence the unique voices of the people behind it. And I think it's in every business, game developer, and so on's best interest to stay as far as possible away from any politics in general, because all you'll end up doing is pissing people off and alienating fans for no other reason than you chose to. Finally, let's look at Kotaku with their article titled "The Stellar Blade Censorship Circus Explained." And this article is pretty much just Kotaku saying that the discourse surrounding Stellar Blade is stupid and they hate Grums and anyone who associates with them. But I think it's important to state that what's happening here with Stellar Blade, Warhammer, and more is what I've been always saying: stop attacking the audience. Stop gaslighting them and respect them, because ultimately they are responsible for your continued success. It is never the other way around. I don't blame Shift Up for any changes. It is clearly Sony being moronic as per usual, and like I said in my previous videos, boycotting Stellar Blade will do nothing but hurt only Shift Up in the long term, and you'll just never see more content like it if you don't support it. I would much rather people boycott Warhammer over Stellar Blade, since they're pushing very weird flags on miniatures and going out of their way to change the lore and keep twisting the knife into fans' guts. But as per usual, Kotaku is a sinking ship ran by morons who are degenerates. Maybe the SNK Saudi prince can buy Kotaku and turn it into a based haven. Now that would be hilarious. While he's at it, he should buy IGN too and purge it of the activists. But as you can see, the battle for Warhammer Soul continues. Stellar Blade is still on the sights of journalists. Saudi princes are apparently making video games now. And some really weird flags are being celebrated for all the wrong reasons. So what do you think about all of this? Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe, like, and share the video. And thanks to my patrons as always. Have a wonderful day, stay based, and I'll see you in the next one.